Now we're getting ready to calculate our process cost. Whenever you're given with the process costing problem, there's always 5 steps that you have to go through before you can calculate the costs that were transferred out and the cost of your ending work in process inventory. Make sure that you know these 5 steps and you know the order of these 5 steps. We will talk about calculating each of the 5 steps using an example. We're only going to learn how to assign total costs to units completed and to units in working process inventory in our first process or first department. So you don't have to worry about your chapter anywhere from page 274 or 275 onwards, because we're not going to cover that in this section. We're going to use this problem to illustrate our 5 process costing steps. This problem is the one that's on your page 272 of your textbook. It's summary problem 1. Be sure to pause the video and go read this question, paying particular attention to the different type of information they've given you. They've given you, typically they tell you what the 2 departments or 2 or 3 departments that this company uses, in this case tile forming, tile finishing. They give you information about units right here, and they give information of costs right here. As you're reading the problem, read it once or twice, and then the things that you have to keep looking out for is to calculate your equivalent units, what is the percentage completion? And you have to take a look at your direct materials percentage of completion and your work conversion cost percentage of completion. If you notice, your direct materials and conversion cost completion is given straight away in this problem. You don't have to figure it out, it's given for you. So make sure you read the question and then we'll continue from there. Let's summarize the information they've given. They've told us that they've got 2 processes, forming and finishing, and we're going to take a look at the forming department costs, so which is the first department or the first process, and that's all we're going to focus on in this chapter, the very first process. Let's take a closer look at the forming department. It's our first department, and we're going to take a look at the cost information for the month of May. You know that you've had beginning work in process of 2,000 units. They started 18,000 units in production. They completed and transferred out 16,000 units to the finishing department, and they have 4,000 units in your ending work in process. Whenever you're doing a process costing problem, you need to know that the number of units that go in to a process is the same as the number of units coming out of the process. So here we have 20,000 units going in, and you have 20,000 units coming out. Now let's move on to the first 2 steps of the process costing problem. Step 1 says to calculate the flow of physical units. You will be setting up your problem like this. This is the setup for steps 1 and 2. So you're going to have your flow of physical production, which is units to account for. You're going to set up your beginning work in process plus started in production, and you will have total physical units to account for. The next section is how do you account for those units. You'll have units accounted for by having your completed and transferred out and your ending work in process at the end of May. I know it says May 21st, but it's actually May 31st, right? That will give you your total physical units accounted for. So points to note, in your flow of production, you know that your units to account for, which are shown there, have to equal your units accounted for, which are there, which basically is what we talked about earlier. What goes in has to be the same as what comes out. Now you go to your data table and you fill in your flow of physical units. How many units did they have for beginning work in process? This is step 1, by the way. You had 2,000 units. You had 18,000 started, therefore you had 20,000 total physical units to account for. How do we account for those units? What did we do with those units? We completed and transferred out 16,000 units, and in our ending work in process we had 4,000 units, giving you 20,000 units that we accounted for. Again, your units to account for is going to be the same as units accounted for. That is step 1. In some questions, they'll give you 3 of these 4 things, and you'll have to figure out the 4th item. So they may give you beginning work in process, started in production, and your ending work in process, and they will ask you how much was your completed and transferred out. And since you know that these two are equal, you should be able to figure out what's your completed work in process or completed and transferred out. Let's move on to step 2. Step 2 says compute the output in terms of equivalent units. In step 2, we're only going to focus on this bottom half of our flow of physical units. So we're only going to calculate equivalent units for units accounted for. We're going to calculate equivalent units for completed and transferred out, as well as ending work in process. And notice how we have split it into direct materials and conversion costs. So first step is how many units of direct materials are there in our completed and transferred out. How complete is our completed and transferred out units? If they're completed and transferred out, they're 100% complete. So your equivalent units are 16,000 units times 100%, or 16,000. How about conversion costs? How complete are these completed and transferred out units for conversion costs? Again, they're completed and transferred out, so they are 100% complete for your conversion costs. So your equivalent units for conversion costs are again 16,000 times 100%, 16,000. Your work in process units are 25% complete as for direct materials and 55% complete for conversion costs. So your direct material equivalent units is 4,000 units, which was the amount of units in your ending work in process, multiplied by 25%, giving you 1,000 units, 1,000 equivalent units. Similarly, for your conversion cost, you're going to multiply 4,000 by 55%, giving you 2,200 equivalent units. Then you total it up in the bottom here, and you have a total equivalent units for direct materials of 17,000, which is adding your completed and your ending work in process. And for your conversion cost, you have 18,200 equivalent units. This completes step 1 and 2. Be sure to copy this down on your notebook, because we will be using the same steps for every single problem in process costing.